It's a Copic coloring fiesta today. A lot of you, when you saw this card posted on my blog and on Instagram a while back, said you wanted to know how I did this. And a lot of you, including Copic in the craft room, thought it was airbrush. But I want to show you how I achieved this effect without airbrush, just so you know you don't have to airbrush anything. You can do lots of things with your markers. The stamp set is called Up and Away, and it has a couple little animals and this really great set of balloons. I had colored the bunny on the one that everybody saw and demanded that I show you how to do this. This time we're going to do the monkey. Same techniques though. For the balloons, the B04 was the base tone that I put on the blue balloons. And if you're not familiar with my Copic coloring style, I like to put down the lightest color first and just flood the paper in that area with that light color. Then I add my darkest color. Here it was B26, and I made a C shape on each of the balloons with the B26. And then I'll go back in and add B24 to blend out that B26, just a little bit on either side of it, and scrub it around there a little bit and soften it. And then I go back in one more time with my B04, the base color, and just color over top of the whole thing real lightly, and that blends the whole thing. Now you'll notice as I'm doing these balloons that there's a little highlight on that left side, and that's because I'm allowing for some bounced light. Since this is outside, there's sun all over the place, you can leave just a little tiny bit of a highlight on that left side before you start your shadows. If you go all the way to the left with your shadows, don't worry about it. That's perfectly fine. But it does add a little bit of that roundness and that balloon feel when it's a really sunny day like this card image is going to have on it. So again, for the red balloons, R24 is my base. I added the R89 shadows in that C shape. And now I'm blending that a little further with my R37 and softening out the R89. And then I'm going to go in with my R24 and soften that even further. So the balloons are going to be all beautiful and blended well. Next, the white balloons, you just want a little tiny bit of color. So I'm using C1 and C0 only, and I'm not doing a color flood. Some people will color flood with the 0 marker first, and you certainly can, but these colors are so light that I'm just going to throw in a little bit of them. The monkey, I am going to color the entire monkey first with YR23. That's my lightest color in the group that I'm going to be using. And I want his body, aside from his face and his belly, to be kind of a darker reddish, sort of yellow, golden, red, yellow, brown color. So I'm adding E09 to add some redness to it. All the other ones in this group are going to be YR colors, but I wanted his body to feel different than his tummy and his face. So I added a significant amount of this E09 in my shading areas, all the dark spots. Then YR27, which you'll notice has the same YR as the YR23 for the next level, and I'm blending out the E09 using that YR27. And I'm leaving a tiny, tiny bit of highlight instead of coloring the whole thing with the YR27, because then I can take my YR24, which is just a little darker than the YR23. I'm going to use that for the shadows on the monkey's face and on his tummy, and then a little bit of the YR23 again now for blending out the rest of the body, and then just real soft on the tummy and the face. Just light flicks, because if you add too much, you're going to get a little crazy, and then it'll all start looking like it's one color. And now for the background. YG01 is the color that I picked to start with, so I'm flooding the paper with a really light green color first. Just putting it down there. I'm not worried about blending and getting it all looking like it's smooth and gorgeous, because I'm going to be adding layers and layers of color. This is just to set all of that grassy area down below and get that paper good and wet. And we'll add some more colors to it. And next we're going to take a slightly darker green, and we're going to set another chunk of the scene, which is going to be a line of trees. And I want the line of trees to be not necessarily entirely behind him. I want his little foot hanging down below. That's going to add some depth to it rather than having him in front of all of the trees. And the trees themselves, I'm just scrubbing back and forth, just real light flicks with the tip of the marker and going back and forth. And as I get to the bottom of the tree, I'm using more of the side of the marker. So the tips are up at the top so I can get those sharp edges on the trees, and then just scrub back and forth, swinging your marker back and forth to create the rest of the tree. And I want it to be a soft bank of trees. I don't want a lot of detail in it because there's a lot of detail in his face, and I want him and his balloons to be the hero of this whole image. Of course, there's my color. Sorry if you were wondering what color I was using. Forgot to put my cap out. YG13. And just adding more of those trees. I'm going to add a tiny, tiny little hillside off in the distance with tiny trees. The further in the distance something gets, the smaller it's going to be. So you can see by comparison, these will be little itty bitty tiny trees. And now I want to add the place where his shadow is going to be. It's going to be a little fatter in the middle, a little trailed out on the sides, and just kind of fuss with it a little and figure out what shape I want it to be. If you put it right underneath of his foot, he's going to look like he's barely off the ground. If you put it down below like I did, he looks like he's higher. So you can decide how far up you want him to be flying above the ground. And now YG03, I'm just adding more color to this foreground area. So the field that he's flying out of is going to be darker than the fields in the background, and that will give you that illusion of depth from the front to the back. So I'm just using the side of the marker to flood lots and lots of this lighter green color. Well, it's darker than the color that was there. And then again, I'm going to reiterate the spot where his shadow is, so I make sure that doesn't disappear on me. And then I'm going to go back in and add to the middle section of trees, the one below, or the grass below those trees. I want to add a little bit more color because I want the far hillside way in the back to be the lightest. And I'm adding a little bit more of the YG01 again to the bottom just to smooth out some color in a few spots. And I've kind of decided I want to add a little bit more detail on the hillside in the far distance. And then I think I want to add one more hill way off into the background. That's going to mean that my trees on the left don't stand out as being just little scribbles as much. For the sky, I started with my B000 and just started laying in the sky first so that I could figure out where that skyline is going to be, that top cloud line. And now I'm going in with my B00. The B00 I could have used for the whole thing, but I just wanted to, it's sort of a way to pencil it in the lighter color and decide exactly where I wanted it. And now I'm just filling it in and going back and forth, just adding a whole lot of color. You can use your chisel end of the marker for this, absolutely, in order to fill that color in. You just want it to be really smooth and really rich color, because when you've got a big blank sky and there's no clouds in that section of the sky, by contrast, it's going to make the other section look poofier, so I just wanted to get it really even. So I'll even go back in and add more to it as I go if there's spots that don't seem to dry back quite evenly, because I want it to be really smooth and even. And now I'm drawing the tops of each of the sections of clouds. And I'm just kind of drawing little curved shapes. Not really, there's not a science to this. You're making clouds, and clouds can be all different kinds of shapes. Just make them nice and roundy and not super even. Clouds are never perfectly even because they get blown around by the wind all the time. So I'm adding just that much of them with a little bit at the bottom where the clouds and the sky meet that hillside. Now my B000 marker, or I'm using my quadruple 0, you can use either one. I'm blending out that blue color and adding just some flicks of that marker. So I lay the marker down first, right where the B00 was, and then as I lift that marker up, I flick it vertically, I guess. And I'm even kind of using some rounded strokes and making sort of little C's to give more roundness to each one of those clouds. But just really softly flicking vertically, flicking upward to create those shadows underneath. And now I can go in and add even more little tiny bits of clouds with my really, really light blue marker. And in just a few select spots, allow some of them to be super bright and white, but then adding more detail to a few of the other ones. My last step now is going to be to add a little more detail to the trees down at the bottom, because I wasn't happy with how they were looking, so I wanted to add a little bit more depth and more interest in them. So I'm adding a second row of trees in the front. I'm using a YG25. It's a little bit darker than the color I'd used before, and I'm adding a second row and making them different sizes and different heights than the trees behind them, so that there's two rows, one lighter and one darker, of these trees, which I think really adds some dimension to how the whole tree section looks, and it adds a little bit more interest and a little more detail without taking away from the monkey and his beautiful little balloons. Now here's my finished card. I liked what I did so much for the background that I decided not to put the cinnamon on the outside even, because I really want the viewer to see and enjoy all that wonderful coloring and the clouds and the scene. On the inside, I used this Spread Happiness Wherever You Go sentiment and some layers of paper and a little border punch. And I also used balloons from the Mama Elephant set called Good Times. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please click that like button down in the doobly-doo. And if you have not yet subscribed, you can do so right above my head. There's a little button right there for you. And I would also like to invite you to leave a comment in the doobly-doo down below and tell me, do you like airbrush backgrounds better when I do them, or do you like long, strokey, colory kind of backgrounds like this one? I'm probably going to continue doing both, but I would be curious to see what your opinion is. One of my new patrons reminded me that I have not recently promoted my Patreon page. Patreon.com is a site that helps people like me who produce content for you for free to get a little bit back for it. The way it works is you pledge $1 or $2 or $3 or whatever you want to pledge per video. I do 2 videos a month that I classify as Patreon supported videos. And then at the end of the month, you get charged that amount times however many videos it was. So times 2 in general. And you can also limit your budget. You can say, I don't want to go over this amount per month. So you can set a cap on it if you want. And it's a great way to support people like me or other people who are on Patreon. I also am working on a bunch of cards that you're going to see the video for next week that are going out to my patrons, because at a certain level, you get a card once in a while, and it's time to send out my cards. So I did a whole bunch of next week's video cards. Patrons, keep an eye out for some really cool cards, and next Friday you're going to see how I made them. Okay, I think that's about it. I'm going to go now. I'll see you guys later. Bye.